Star Wars, The Mandalorian and Grogu is set to open this weekend, the first film from Disney Lucasfilm for this intellectual property in nearly 7 years. And Disney is desperately depending on an exceedingly good performance for this. But at $160 million on its global open, that spells some trouble for Disney. Now, in this same article from Deadline, there was another tidbit of information that we covered as well that we may need to go back and look at again. Deadline says, quote, that start for the $165 million net production would be slightly ahead of the global opening for 2018 Solo. Other media outlets have also recited this same $165 million cost, but where does this come from? In a very recent article here today from thatparkplace.com, it looks like we have an answer. The problem is, the answer has raised far more questions. And this movie may be more expensive than anybody is saying. Renegade Online. All right. Good morning once again, Renegade Nation. We have a barn burner here for you on this one because something jumped out at me late Wednesday night with a recent piece that we just released on thatparkplace.com. Let me show you what I'm talking about. How much money does The Mandalorian and Grogu actually need to break even? The title of the piece here from Marvin Montanaro. Let's get into some of the nitty-gritty. As Star Wars prepares for its long-awaited return to theaters, The Mandalorian and Grogu, a major question is hanging over the film heading into opening weekend. How much money does this thing actually need to make? Now, if we believe the trade magazines out there, which have all been reciting the same figure of about $165 million in quote-unquote net production cost, according to some, and to others $165 million in just cost. There's a big difference between net and raw cost here, but we'll get into that in just a moment. We also have to factor in easily another 120 to 130, maybe even 140 or $50 million that Disney is dropping down on marketing for this thing. This is probably one of the most heavily marketed films that I've seen from the Walt Disney Company in some time. And that should be expected considering, again, this is the first Star Wars movie they've put into theaters in 7 years, and there's a whole hell of a lot riding on it. This all started back with a very expensive $10 million Super Bowl commercial back in January or February, whenever that ran, and it's all going since then. Think about all the big red carpet events, all the different trailers and little gimmicks and stuff out there, online marketing on a global scale. This is not a cheap movie to market.
How could I have been so careless?
That being said, my normal calculations on this with a roughly all-in $300 million cost between that $165 in production and maybe about another $130 million in marketing to split the difference. We'll find out from Deadline magazine, I presume, in probably the next several months. But that means that at the retail box office, that would need to pump out about $600 million in total ticket sales that would return about half of that back to Disney. And that's, of course, dependent upon the domestic versus international revenue ticket sales split. But what if this movie actually costs more than $165 million? I'm starting to think it did.
Hold on to your butts.
According to the California Film Tax Commission filings, The Mandalorian and Grogu carried approximately a $166.4 million in qualified California production expenditures, a figure widely reported by entertainment trades as the film's effective production budget. And I want you to look at this chart here very closely because this is a screen grab right from that California Film Commission. Fiscal year of 23-24 and principal photography for this film began in mid to late 24, around August of 2024. Mandalorian and Grogu, feature film, non-independent, filming days in California 92, give you all the cast figure. Qualified expenditures of $166.5, let's call it, million dollars. Well, that seems damn close to the $165 to $166 million figure that we keep seeing bantied about out there, right? Right. Next to that line, to be fair, is also a credit allocation or a film tax credit of about $21 million, which would also seem to suggest a reasoning for why some folks are coming in with figures that are around $145 million. But here's the problem, is the word qualified. Qualified expenditures.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
If you've watched this channel long enough, you've seen us tear apart, along with our friends at Forbes magazine like Caroline Reed and Christian Silt, some of these financial filings that happen in the United Kingdom from the Walt Disney Company and others. But what I want to remind people about those reports that are filed in the UK is that the UK demands that you report every penny you spent, whether it's a qualified expense or not. And when we say the word qualified, that means there's only certain expenses that are listed in a figure like that. Versus in the UK, it's every dollar you spent, whether it was above the line or below the line. So we have to ask ourselves, what is a qualified expense when it comes to the state of California? Film tax credits, no matter where they are typically almost always, if not always, paid on below the line expenses. And that would be qualified in this case in California. Meaning that for the average Joe you hired to build the set, build a costume, a grip, a gaffer, people that are just your routine laborers on the production of the film. Now, a quick Google search asking what are and are not qualified expenses under the California film tax credit system reveals simply this. Non-qualified expenditures for the California film tax credit include costs related to above-the-line labor. Again, non-qualified. Federal payroll taxes and expenses occurred prior to the issuance of the credit allocation letter. Well, what the hell does that mean? I'll show you. Let's take a look at California's own document detailing what are both above and below the line expenses. And let's specifically look at above the line. In other words, non-qualified expenses. Expenses that, in other words, would not be included in the $165 million figure that everybody seems to be quoting. Above the line, story rights, acquisition expenses, writers, showrunners, editors and consultants, research, script timing, secretary, script duplication, writer's assistants, all kind of other different things, including WGA registration fees. Producers and staff are above the line, wouldn't you guess? Producers, executive producers, associate producers, producers, secretaries, drivers, trailers. How about the director himself, the second unit director, dialogue coaches, fight choreographers, technical advisors, directors, drivers, secretaries, assistants. How about the cast, principal cast, voices, as in voiceover actors, singers, supporting cast, even day players, cast guardians. They might need a few of those. It's a Disney production. Sideline musicians, dancers, pilots, loop group, what the hell is that? Puppet captains, puppeteers, wardrobe allowance, meal penalties, vocal and dialogue coaches, technical advisors, fitness coaches, sobriety coaches, teachers, welfare workers, casting directors, casting assistants, casting director bonus, agent fees for employees, cell phones, mobile home dressing rooms, wardrobe allowance, principal gifts, principal cast meals. In other words, let me break it down for you simply. The $165 million figure that seems to be getting thrown around, granted, I realize there's a $22 million credit on the second line next to that on the California screen grab. But we're talking about no Dave Filoni, no Jon Favreau. Those are as writers and directors. Then you've got no Dave Filoni and no Jon Favreau as executive producers on this. No Kathleen Kennedy as executive producer on this. Or how about a Carrie Beck? You've got no Pedro Pascal, either on screen or as a voice actor. You've got no Sigourney Weaver. And we can go on and on and on and on. All of the stunt coordinators, all of the fight choreographers, everything else on there. I'm starting to think that $20 million film tax credit is probably a good bit less than all of those things I just listed to you combined, meaning that this movie is probably even more expensive than $165 million, almost assuredly.
You're welcome.
What? No.
By the way, that means not even the lodging and the meals for all of those names I just named would even be a film tax credit eligible expense either. And just for argument's sake, let's take a look at IMDb Pro right here, just so we can clarify when this was done. Production status, pre-production in January of 2024. That's basically when they shifted gears to turn The Mandalorian Season 4 into a theatrical release feature film, which would absolutely necessitate that certain fees would have to go up, and in many cases, certain contracts for performance would have to be renegotiated and become a lot more expensive. Let's go back to February of 2022. Yeah, just a little over 4 years ago, and an article here in Puck Magazine from Matt Bellany. In talking about the enormous cost of streaming, Matt Bellany specifically references one Jon Favreau and The Mandalorian in relation to Star Wars and Lucasfilm. He says this: "Sure, there are exceptions. Jon Favreau originally signed on to do just one season of The Mandalorian. So when it became Disney Plus's signature series, he extracted a, quote, insane deal to continue, with all kinds of bonuses and incentives for writing or directing individual episodes." If somebody would like to put a dollar figure on the word insane in this case, I'm all ears. I'm not going to even begin to speculate, but I can't imagine that it's a small figure if it's called insane. Think about what Jon Favreau would have been able to command following Season 2 of The Mandalorian, for Pete's sake, which was even bigger than Season 1, and we all know why. Yeah, we had kind of a mess after that with Season 3, but now you ask Jon Favreau to come in and do Season 4, and then midstream, you tell Jon Favreau, never mind, you're now going back to making a feature motion picture for the Walt Disney Company. The last couple of motion pictures that Jon Favreau did for the Walt Disney Company brought in well over $1 billion. Maybe you remember things like The Jungle Book.
It's good.
In other words, this insane deal likely got even more ludicrous when that came around because Jon Favreau can command it. And according to this, none of Jon Favreau is included in that $165 million. Not his fee for writing, not his fee for directing, not his fee as producer and executive producer, so on and so on and so forth. Neither would be Pedro Pascal or Sigourney Weaver or any of the other people that worked writing on this, second directors and all. There's a lot of people missing from this $165 million. And not just any people, but the very most expensive people on that set. Does a $20 million film tax credit really cover all of those folks and all of those costs for something of this theatrical scale? I kind of doubt it. And that means that the net cost for this is probably actually a decent bit higher than $165 million. Again, it's easy to get these wires crossed and make this mistake because we've talked about how the United Kingdom demands that figures be reported, but that's not the same way, apparently, that the state of California has these come in. Again, California is simply asking and visually reporting qualified expenses, only those expenses that would, in other words, qualify for the film tax credit, whereas the UK asks for everything. If a $160 million opening weekend looked bad enough, it may now even look a little bit worse than what we suspected. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that production costs were understated by $100 million, but I think there's certainly more than 165, given where I think, at least coincidentally, these figures seem to be coming from, and considering what the state of California says about them themselves. As it stands now, The Mandalorian and Grogu, if tracking is accurate and this movie legs out like most people expect it to, it's going to struggle to maybe even past $400 million when it needs at least $600 million to break even, and nowhere left to go after it except maybe a little bit of PVOD and a lot of death on Disney Plus forever, with no real cash flows. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.